They don't warn you about the most dangerous lies. They dress them up as advice. They whisper them in classrooms, podcasts, and graduation speeches. And the more comforting the lie feels, the faster it destroys you. Here's the lie. Do what you love, and the money will find you. It sounds harmless, almost holy. But that sentence has quietly crippled more men than failure ever did, because it teaches you to mistake emotion for strategy. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. If passion alone created wealth, why are so many passionate men broke? Why do artists struggle while bankers eat? Why do men who follow their heart end up resenting the very thing they once loved? That question should make you uneasy. Good. Unease is the beginning of clarity. Machiavelli understood something modern motivation refuses to admit. The world does not reward purity of intention. It rewards advantage. And the moment you let your feelings choose your direction, you surrender advantage. I learned this the hard way. As a boy, I wanted to be an athlete, not casually, obsessively. The early mornings, the late nights, the fantasy of applause, glory, freedom. Everyone encouraged it. Follow your passion. You're talented. Do what you love. What no one told me was this: talent without leverage is a trap. Every year I trained harder, the competition grew larger. Every inch I gained, 1,000 men chased the same dream. And while I was busy proving my devotion, the system quietly closed its doors. No contracts, no security, no power, just effort and hope. That's when the illusion cracked. Machiavelli wrote that men are ruined not by evil intentions, but by misjudging reality, by chasing what feels meaningful instead of what makes them untouchable. Passion feels heroic. Power feels uncomfortable, so men choose passion. And here's the cruel part. The world applauds you while you're passionate. It only respects you once you're powerful. Modern motivational culture won't tell you this, because it doesn't sell well. It sounds cold. It sounds ruthless. But ruthlessness is honesty without decoration. Financial freedom doesn't come from loving what you do. It comes from controlling where value flows, and value flows toward scarcity, timing, position, leverage, not enthusiasm. Passion without leverage turns into burnout. Purpose without power turns into resentment, and belief without strategy turns into poverty wearing a smile. But this lie is only the first layer, because once you accept passion as your compass, you become predictable, and predictable men are easy to control. The system loves predictable men. Men who believe hard work is enough. Men who trust fairness. Men who think patience will be rewarded automatically. Machiavelli would have smiled at this, because history shows a brutal pattern. Those who rise don't ask, "What do I love?" They ask, "Where do I gain advantage?" And once you see that distinction, you can never unsee it. But here's the real danger. Once you abandon passion as your guide, something else must replace it. And if you choose the wrong replacement, you don't just stay poor. You become dangerous to yourself. That's where lesson 2 begins. Here's a truth that offends honest men. Hard work is not noble. It's not moral. It's not even valuable by itself. Hard work is a tool, and like any tool, it can build a kingdom or dig your grave. Most men never learn the difference. They were taught that exhaustion equals progress, that sweat earns respect, that if they just outwork everyone else, success will eventually surrender. That belief feels fair. It feels just. And that's exactly why it fails. Machiavelli warned that men are destroyed by the virtues they misunderstand, and hard work is the most misunderstood virtue of all. Look around. Who works harder than the laborer breaking his back for decades, the delivery driver racing time, the factory worker doing double shifts? And yet, who owns the factory? Who sets the wages? Who controls the time? Not the hardest worker. Hard work without position makes you useful, not powerful, and useful men are always replaceable. This is where the illusion deepens. You're told, just put your head down. Grind now, enjoy later. Pay your dues. But dues to whom? Here's the uncomfortable answer. You're paying dues to people who understand leverage better than you do. Because the man who controls outcomes doesn't work harder, he works higher. Machiavelli observed this centuries ago in Florence. The mercenaries fought, the craftsmen toiled, the peasants bled, but the princes? They positioned. They understood that effort applied in the wrong place strengthens someone else's power, not your own. This is where modern men get trapped. They confuse being busy with being dangerous. They confuse productivity with authority. They confuse discipline with direction. And the system encourages it. Because a man who believes effort alone is enough will never question who owns the reward. Let me tell you a story they don't put on motivational posters. Two men start at the same time. One works 14 hours a day, perfect execution, zero complaints. The other works 6 hours a day, but spends the rest of his time learning where money moves, who controls access, and how value is distributed. 10 years later, one is exhausted. The other is untouchable. The difference wasn't work ethic. It was leverage awareness. Machiavelli understood this deeply. He warned that loyalty without power is submission, and effort without leverage is obedience disguised as ambition. Hard work is only valuable when it multiplies something. Influence, control, ownership, optionality. If your work doesn't compound into one of these, it's slowly draining you. That's why so many disciplined men still feel stuck. They did everything right, inside a game designed to reward someone else, and here's the most dangerous part. The longer you stay in that loop, the harder it is to leave, because your identity becomes tied to effort, to sacrifice, to endurance. Walking away feels like betrayal, not strategy. So men double down. They work harder, they sleep less, they wait longer, until one day they wake up bitter, not broke, but worse, trapped. Machiavelli would call this the fate of men who mistake service for strength. Because power never asks, who worked hardest? Power asks, who controls the outcome? And the moment you realize that, you start seeing another illusion hiding in plain sight. An illusion even more dangerous than blind hard work. The illusion that patience will save you. That waiting is wisdom. That time is on your side. It's not. And in the next lesson you'll see why patience, when misunderstood, is one of the most expensive mistakes a man can make. There is a sentence that has quietly ruined more men than failure ever could. Be patient, your time will come. It sounds mature, responsible, almost enlightened. But Machiavelli would have recognized it instantly for what it often is, a lullaby sung to keep men still. Patience is praised because it keeps people calm, predictable, contained, and calm, predictable men do not disrupt systems. Here's the truth no one says out loud. Time does not reward men automatically. Time exposes them. If you are positioned correctly, time multiplies you. If you are not, time erodes you. Waiting does not create advantage. Advantage creates patience. That reversal changes everything. Most men are taught to wait before they are ready to act. They're told to gather experience, to mature, to pay their dues. But while they wait, something else is happening. The world is not frozen. Markets shift. Gatekeepers solidify. Opportunities close. Networks harden. And the longer you wait without leverage, the more expensive movement becomes. Machiavelli warned that fortune favors the bold, not because boldness is noble, but because delay empowers enemies. History proves this mercilessly. The prince who hesitates loses territory. The general who waits loses initiative. The merchant who delays loses access. Yet modern culture treats hesitation as wisdom. Think about how many men you know who say, "I'm not ready yet. One more year. After I save a bit more. Once things are stable." Stable? Stability is the reward of those who already won. For everyone else, it's a cage with comfortable lighting. Patience feels safe because it removes risk, but it also removes momentum. And momentum is the currency of power. Here's the uncomfortable pattern. Men who wait too long don't suddenly act later. They slowly adapt to waiting. They begin to rationalize comfort. They confuse caution with intelligence. They start fearing disruption more than failure. That's when patience turns into paralysis. Machiavelli observed this in rulers who lost everything without a single battle. They didn't fall because they were attacked. They fell because they delayed responding. Fortune is not a goddess who rewards good behavior. She's a force that must be seized, and she does not announce her arrival politely. Opportunity comes disguised as inconvenience, as discomfort, as pressure. Men who are patient often miss it because it doesn't match their timeline. And once it passes, they call it bad luck. No, it was bad positioning. Let me tell you something that stings. The men who say, "I'm waiting for the right time," are usually waiting for certainty. Certainty never comes before action, it comes after. Powerful men don't move when conditions are perfect. They move when hesitation becomes more expensive than risk. That's why Machiavelli valued decisiveness over correctness. A wrong move made early can be corrected. A perfect move made late is useless. But here's where this lesson turns darker. Because once you break free from blind patience, another illusion tries to replace it. The illusion of loyalty. The belief that staying faithful to people, systems, or paths will eventually be rewarded. That loyalty builds trust. That commitment guarantees protection. That endurance earns favor. It doesn't. In fact, loyalty without leverage is one of the fastest ways to lose everything. And in the next lesson, you'll see why the men who rise are not the most loyal, but the most adaptable, and why misplaced loyalty has ended more fortunes than betrayal ever did. There's a belief that feels honorable and quietly bankrupts men. Stay loyal, it will pay off. Loyal to the company, loyal to the mentor, loyal to the system, loyal to the path you chose years ago. It sounds like character, it sounds like strength. But Machiavelli would have recognized it as something far more dangerous. Unprotected loyalty is exposure. Because loyalty by itself has no power, it only has value when the other side needs you. Most men are loyal because they fear uncertainty, because loyalty gives them identity, because leaving feels like betrayal, even when staying is suicide. That's how traps work. They don't feel like cages, they feel like commitments. Machiavelli observed that rulers were not destroyed by enemies alone. They were destroyed by men who stayed loyal long after circumstances changed. Here's the rule history keeps proving. Institutions reward loyalty until it conflicts with their survival. Then loyalty becomes irrelevant. Ask yourself something uncomfortable. If your position vanished tomorrow, would the system protect you or replace you? If the answer scares you, that's not paranoia, that's awareness. Men confuse being appreciated with being indispensable. They think because they're liked, they're safe. But power doesn't care about affection. It cares about necessity. A man who is loyal but replaceable is disposable. A man who is difficult to replace is respected, even when disliked. This is where men hesitate, because adapting feels cold. Strategic exits feel ruthless. Repositioning feels selfish. But Machiavelli never confused morality with survival. He understood that allegiance without leverage creates dependency, and dependency creates obedience. That's why so many men stay too long in places that drain them. They say, I owe them. They gave me a chance. I can't just leave. Meanwhile, the system owes them nothing. Loyalty is only powerful when it is optional. If you cannot walk away, you are not loyal. You are trapped. This is why powerful men always maintain alternatives. Multiple paths, multiple income streams, multiple alliances. Not because they're disloyal, but because they refuse to be cornered. Machiavelli warned that men who place their fate entirely in the hands of others surrender control of their future. And once control is gone, dignity follows. Here's the bitter truth most motivational advice avoids. No one rewards sacrifice indefinitely. Eventually they expect it. And the moment you resist, you are no longer loyal. You are difficult. That's when the mask comes off. Loyalty did not protect you. It revealed your weakness. The men who rise don't burn bridges recklessly, but they also never chain themselves to one shore. They move before stagnation turns into decay. They reposition before loyalty becomes obligation. They leave while they're still respected, not after they're tolerated. But here's the twist. Once a man frees himself from blind loyalty, a new illusion appears. The illusion that being liked is power, that if people approve of you, support you, admire you, you're safe. You're not. Approval is one of the weakest currencies in existence, and men who chase it unknowingly give away something priceless: authority. Because the moment you need approval, you begin negotiating your boundaries. And the next lesson exposes why men who want to be liked are the easiest men to control. There is a silent trade most men make without realizing it. They trade authority for approval. They lower their voice to keep peace. They soften their stance to avoid friction. They delay decisions to avoid upsetting others. And each small concession feels harmless. But Machiavelli knew something modern society avoids admitting. The need to be liked is a weakness that can be exploited endlessly. Approval feels safe because it creates warmth, connection, belonging. But power does not live in comfort. It lives in certainty. The moment you need others to like you, you hand them leverage over your decisions. They don't even have to threaten you. Disapproval becomes enough. That's why the most controlled men are not the weakest. They're the most agreeable. They say yes too quickly. They explain themselves too much. They apologize when they shouldn't. And slowly, without force, their boundaries erode. Machiavelli observed this in rulers who tried to be loved rather than respected. They listened too much. They compromised too often. They feared backlash more than decay. And when crisis arrived, they had no authority left to command loyalty. Here's the brutal reality. People don't follow men they like. They follow men they trust to decide. Trust comes from clarity, from firmness, from consistency, not from charm. A man who is always agreeable signals uncertainty. A man who is always accommodating signals fear of loss. And fear is readable. Men who chase approval believe popularity equals safety. But popularity attracts attention, not protection. The moment conditions change, approval evaporates. Machiavelli warned that favor is temporary, but structure endures. This is why powerful men are often misunderstood. They are not cruel. They are precise. They do not seek conflict. They simply refuse to negotiate their core. And that refusal unsettles people. Because most men live in negotiation with the world. They adjust themselves to fit expectations. They mold their identity to remain accepted. Powerful men do the opposite. They define the frame and let others decide whether to stay inside it. That's why they're respected even when disliked. Now here's where this lesson cuts deep. Many men believe that if they just become successful first, then they can stop pleasing others. But the habit of approval seeking doesn't disappear with money. It scales. A man who seeks approval at a small level will seek it at a larger one, from peers, from investors, from audiences. And the higher he rises, the more expensive his compromises become. That's why Machiavelli emphasized learning when to withstand hatred. Because hatred, unlike approval, has limits. Once people express it, it loses power. But the fear of losing approval never ends. It keeps you guessing, adjusting, diluting. And while you're busy managing perception, someone else is quietly consolidating control. Here's the shift. The moment you stop needing to be liked, something strange happens. People lean in. They listen more carefully. They test your boundaries and then respect them. Not because you demanded it, but because certainty commands gravity. But abandoning approval exposes another danger. Once you no longer care what people think, you may start believing you're invincible. And that illusion is just as lethal. Because arrogance has destroyed more empires than insecurity ever did. And the next lesson reveals why confidence without awareness turns power into a ticking bomb. There is a moment when weakness flips into danger. It happens when a man mistakes confidence for immunity. He stops listening, stops observing, stops questioning, and for a while, nothing goes wrong. That's what makes this illusion lethal. Machiavelli feared arrogance more than fear, because fear keeps you alert. Arrogance makes you blind. Many men escape approval seeking only to fall into its opposite trap. They stop caring what others think and start believing nothing can touch them. Success amplifies this. Money quiets warnings. Status filters criticism. Surroundings become polite instead of honest. And slowly, the man begins to confuse silence for loyalty and absence of resistance for strength. History is filled with men who rose correctly, then fell because they stopped watching. Machiavelli warned that fortune punishes those who grow complacent. Not immediately, strategically. Confidence is necessary, but unchecked confidence erases adaptability, and adaptability is the true edge. Here's the difference most men miss. Confidence says, I can handle this. Awareness asks, what am I not seeing? Powerful men balance both. Arrogant men dismiss the second question entirely. That's when cracks appear. They ignore small shifts. They underestimate quiet rivals. They assume past victories guarantee future ones. But power is not static. It's a moving target. What protected you yesterday may expose you tomorrow. This is where Machiavelli becomes ruthless. He observed that rulers fall not because enemies grow stronger, but because leaders stop evolving. They cling to methods that once worked. They trust systems that once favored them. They protect habits instead of positions. And when reality shifts, they react too late. Let me be clear. Arrogance is not loud. It's subtle. It sounds like, "I already know this. That won't happen to me. They're not a threat." Those sentences precede collapse more reliably than any enemy. The men who endure remain slightly paranoid, not fearful, alert. They assume advantage is temporary. They assume alliances expire. They assume comfort is a warning sign. That mindset keeps them sharp. Machiavelli respected men who planned as if fortune could turn at any moment, because fortune always does. Here's the brutal twist. The higher you rise, the less margin for error you have. Small mistakes at low levels are forgiven. At high levels, they are fatal. That's why humility, not in speech, but in observation, is critical. Powerful men ask, "Who benefits if I fail? What changed while I wasn't looking? Who's quiet when they shouldn't be?" These questions keep them alive. But awareness alone is not enough, because once you see the battlefield clearly, you face the hardest lesson of all, knowing when to act and when to wait. Move too early, and you expose yourself. Move too late, and you're finished. Timing is the blade that separates kings from casualties. And in the next lesson, you'll learn why most men act at the wrong moment, and how Machiavelli understood timing as the ultimate weapon. There is a reason most men fail, even when they finally understand the rules. They act at the wrong moment. They either rush out of fear or hesitate out of comfort. Both are fatal. Machiavelli believed timing was more important than morality, effort, or intelligence combined, because the same action can be genius or suicide depending on when it's executed. Most men don't lose because they're wrong. They lose because they're early or late. Too early, and the world resists you. You lack support, you lack protection. You become a warning example for others. Too late, and the opportunity hardens. Positions are taken, gatekeepers are entrenched, risks skyrockets. Timing is invisible to impatient men and terrifying to cautious ones. That's why so few master it. Machiavelli observed that fortune behaves like a river. When calm, it can be guided. When flooded, it destroys everything. Wise men prepare channels before the flood. But most men react only once water is already at their throat. This is where desperation enters. Men who waited too long suddenly leap. They quit without leverage. They invest without insight. They speak without protection. They confuse urgency with courage. And fortune punishes that mistake brutally. On the other side, fearful men overprepare. They analyze endlessly. They seek guarantees. They want perfect clarity. But clarity arrives only after commitment. So while they wait, others quietly move. Here's the pattern Machiavelli saw repeatedly. The men who win don't act when everyone agrees. They act when signals align, quietly. They watch. Shifts in attention, changes in incentives, cracks in authority, moments when resistance is weakest. They don't announce their move. They don't seek validation. They strike when the cost of action is lowest and the cost of inaction is rising. That moment is uncomfortable because it doesn't feel safe. It feels ambiguous. It feels lonely. That's why most men miss it. They wait for permission that never comes. Machiavelli admired men who could sense when fortune was turning, not because they predicted the future, but because they understood human behavior. Power structures rot quietly before they collapse publicly. Markets whisper before they scream. Opportunities signal before they explode, but only to those who are watching. This is why awareness from the previous lesson matters. Timing is awareness applied, but here's the hardest truth of all. Even perfect timing won't save you if you choose the wrong endgame. Many men escape poverty only to enter a new prison. More money, more stress, more exposure. They win the game and discover they're playing the wrong one. Machiavelli warned that men who pursue wealth without defining control end up owned by the very thing they chased, which leads to the final lesson, the one most men never hear, the one that determines whether financial freedom actually frees you or quietly enslaves you at a higher level. Here is the final illusion, the one that swallows men whole after they win. They believe money is freedom. It's not. Money is leverage's shadow. Control is the substance. Machiavelli understood this with terrifying clarity. He watched men gain riches only to lose autonomy. He saw merchants become servants to their own success. He saw princes surrounded by gold, yet owned by obligation. Because wealth without control creates a new master. More clients, more expectations, more visibility, more pressure. And suddenly the man who escaped poverty finds himself imprisoned by maintenance. This is why some wealthy men look exhausted instead of free. They don't own their time. They don't control their exposure. They can't disengage without consequence. They built income, but not exit. Machiavelli warned that dependence, even on prosperity, is vulnerability. If your lifestyle collapses without constant motion, you are not free. If your income demands constant presence, you are not powerful. If your identity is tied to output, you are replaceable by burnout. True financial freedom is boring on the surface and lethal underneath. It is optionality, silence, distance, irreversibility. It is the ability to say no without explanation, to disappear without damage, to wait without anxiety. The men who truly win don't chase more. They compress. They reduce exposure. They simplify dependencies. They convert money into time, privacy, and choice. This is the lesson Machiavelli would end on, not how to get rich, but how to avoid becoming owned. Because the final stage of power is not dominance, it's detachment. You no longer need approval. You no longer fear loss. You no longer rush timing. You move when you choose. You speak when it matters. You act when the cost-benefit is asymmetric in your favor. Most men never reach this stage because they mistake accumulation for control. They climb endlessly, never realizing the ladder is leaning against the wrong wall. And here's the quiet truth. If you understood even half of these lessons, you already think differently than the crowd. Not better, but clearer. And clarity is the rarest form of power left. Machiavelli never promised happiness. He promised survival. And survival, in a world of illusions, is the ultimate advantage. The question is no longer whether you want financial freedom. It's whether you're willing to abandon the lies that keep you chasing instead of choosing. Because fortune does not reward the hopeful, she rewards the prepared. And now, you are prepared.